Sorry, things have changed because I was screen sharing. We're good. Go for it.
Okay, so starting from now, we are recording this webinar and we also are live captioning it, and I will put in a link for that in just a moment. But I want to let you know the speakers for today's webinar are Brenda Boyd from Quality Matters, myself, Barbara Birch from Quality Matters, Wade Lee from the University of Toledo, and we are going to share a video of Wade. If the audio is not working for you, Kay Shattuck is going to be following up on that with some commentary. So you will be able to get that information. So we will have Kay Shattuck from Quality Matters, Bethany Simonich from Kent State University, and Whitney Zimmerman from Pennsylvania State University. And with that, I would like to hand things off to Brenda, and I will put the live captioning link into the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm Brenda Boyd. I'm Senior Academic Director, Program Services for Quality Matters. I was also co-chair of the QM Higher Education Rubric 6th Edition Rubric Committee. So I'd like to kick things off by sharing with you the timeline that happens when we are updating a new edition of the QM rubric. So what you see on the screen right now is a rubric update timeline. As you can see on the far left, research and analysis is the longest arrow. It goes on all of the time at Quality Matters, and Kay Shattuck will be talking more about that. You can see here that we do have a broad literature review, a QM research review. We do a user survey and get feedback from our community. And then we do an analysis of our course review data, and Whitney will be talking about that in a little while. So we have, we then move into a committee selection, which cascades into updating our professional development, addressing our review process, and communicating about these changes to our community. And so we're just going to focus on that first section today. So the rubric update process. So once the research is completed, you can see that it is one of the balls in our little funnel that goes into the higher education rubric. The committee has a broad amount of expertise, which you will soon find. I'll share that with you in just a bit, how much expertise they have with using the QM rubric. They also, so we select the committee broadly based on their depth of experience with using the QM rubric. And so we select the committee, and the subcommittees are assigned, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. We have a kickoff meeting, and then subcommittee meetings begin, and the subcommittee meetings are really where the changes are made to the rubric. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens behind the scenes. Next slide, please. So our rubric was very experienced. Our rubric committee is very experienced, and so there was not just the rubric committee. There's a 12-member rubric committee. And we also have an 8-member legacy committee that was there to provide guidance and advice to the rubric committee. So of those 20 people, we had 17 master reviewers, 12 QM facilitators, and combined, the 22 people involved in the changes to the rubric have conducted a total of 464 QM certified course reviews. So those are official reviews. That doesn't even bring in any informal usage or internal reviews that have been conducted. So we made up the committee with excuse me, we formed subcommittees around each general standard. So we had an 8-member legacy committee who each one of them took one of the general standards of QM. So there were 8 members, each one was assigned to a subcommittee. And then the rubric committee, each of those 12 members were assigned to 2 different subcommittees for general standards. So you might think about each of those different colored lines in this graphic as one member of the rubric committee. serving on 2 general standard subcommittees. Okay, next slide. And meetings we had. So subcommittees were divided by general standards, and they had countless hours of meetings within their groups, and they would come to a full rubric legacy committee meeting and present their recommendations based on the data that they had, which is what we'll be talking about in the majority of this webinar today. So we'll be talking about those inputs that they received. So they would take that information, and then they would come to our full rubric legacy committee meetings, present their recommendations, and then there would be a comment period available for the rubric committee and the legacy committee members to give feedback on what was recommended. And so those full rubric and legacy committee member meetings, there were over 22 hours of meetings with them. And then after that comment period, the specific review standards and annotations were quote unquote finalized. And this was our kind of first pass at the rubric. So we were really focused on the intention behind the changes. So there had to be a good reason to make the change to the rubric. And then we also had about 3 hours of Delphi process meeting. So we wanted to explain the Delphi study process that we use to assign point values to the rubric. And I know that we'll be talking about that in just a little bit. And so following this, we had more than 80 hours of internal meetings for editing and preparation for these meetings, and after we completed our work. So you can move on to the next slide, please. So then behind the scenes, after the rubric committee was finished with their work, we did quite a bit of editing. We had an editor working with us who was also a member of the legacy committee and was able to provide consistency, ensuring that our intentions were clear in the specific review standards and annotations, that we were fixing any typos, spacing issues, you name it. Then we went ahead and updated our entire professional development curriculum around any changes to the rubric standards. We developed a rubric update that I hope many of you have already completed. And if you are a QM member, that's free and open to you until the end of the year, the end of December. Not only was the 6th edition entered into the course review management system, which is Quality Matters' tool that we use for course reviews, but we also made changes to the interface itself, including creating new fields for evidence found in the course and fields for suggestions for improvement. The QM Rubric workbook was created. That is a months-long process. And we also combed the website to ensure that any references to the 5th edition had been updated appropriately for the 6th edition. So that's the big picture. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Kay Shattuck, who's going to talk about the research and what all of the research was. So I'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you, Brenda. It's always exciting to talk about QM and research. Data analysis, from the broadest scholarly research to our own internal data analysis, informs every aspect of Quality Matters. And it is no more evident than that research involved in the development and validation of the QM standards. This process has been followed with each rubric review and edition since the very first rubric during the 2003-2006 FIPSI grant period. Next, in the next slides, we're going to learn more about the data collected and analyzed from the LIT, the community, application, deep review of standards during the year-long process that led to the 6th edition of the rubric. First, we're going to hear we hope, from the University of Toledo. And Barbara is putting in the audio, a link to the audio if you do not hear the audio.
In the chat, we have put the link for the audio.
Thank you, everyone, for your tolerance in that. Wade Lee was just describing and going through what you all are very familiar with when you do a review of the literature. And Barbara has posted in the chat a link to the video, and more importantly, or maybe just as importantly, some of the final pieces that were the result of this. But thanks to the work completed by the University of Toledo's Russell Center, we were able to utilize an additional 163 pieces of literature from independent educational research publications, scholarly publications. Next slide, please. Aha, thank you. So the work completed by the University of Toledo's Russell Center was analyzed, summarized, compiled along with other submissions in our Quality Matters Research Library and from our own following and involvement with online learning and research. A summary pointing out the following themes was provided to members of the rubric committee, along with all the raw data. Some of the things that we saw as a result of the work that Toledo did and what we already had in the research library, as well as our own involvement with research, is research focused on online learning is maturing to more sophisticated methods. We still certainly appreciate and utilize descriptive case management accounts of what's happening on online learning. But for example, retention and outcomes of success are two research areas that are increasingly being investigated with attention to correlation possibilities of intervening variables. It's no longer just not being reported what's happening in my course. It's becoming more sophisticated, looking at different methodologies and correlations. There's an emphasis, the emphasis on learning objectives is such an ingrained part of instructional design, and even, although it's not always called learning objective, the cognitive sciences. So as such, learning objectives as a standalone variable are rarely investigated. They are a part of the theory and framework that is behind a lot of the research on design. Constructivism is the dominant theoretical theme. Research approaches certainly are somewhat dynamic, but we take snapshots in the past few years of what's been happening, and clearly there's a dominance of constructivism, often via the community of inquiry framework. If in fact you're interested in exploring how dominant the concepts related to constructivism are, you can search in our research library using keywords interaction, engagement, and any of the presences, or just presence, and you will have hundreds of hits of research that's already been done on those topics. So constructivism is a dominant theme. Over the past years, accessibility and inclusivity focused research continues to grow significantly. You know, back in 2005, Standard 8 was developed and included in the rubric from an ethical and, at the time, coming legal responsibility. And I have to tell you, I was there then, and there was not much research on the topic, and that's been changing in the last few years. There is an interesting dynamic that we're seeing is more research studies are being released via online professional media rather than going through scholarly peer-reviewed journals. That's not to say it's a bad thing. It just means we have to be aware of those sources of potential valuable research. These studies are not submitted for the long, rigorous peer review processes in scholarly journal. So we just need to take care, and we do as we can, to make sure that we find what really leads to an actual quality research piece. Documenting and evaluating how the rubric works in real applications for which it's designed is in fact a validation. While Melissa Poole, who is Quality Matters Director of Quality Assurance, regularly observes and analyzes the surface data trends emerging from current and recent completed official reviews. A deeper statistical review of QM collected data was conducted by Dr. Whitney Zimmerman at Penn State. She had previously conducted this same type of analysis for QM with 2008 to 2010 data and 2011-2013 data. I will hand it off now to Whitney.
All right, thanks, Kay. So last spring of 2017, I conducted statistical analyses using data collected from the 2014 to 2016 rubric. I was given data from 2,091 course reviews that were managed by either Quality Matters or by subscribers. The first thing that I looked at were some descriptive statistics. Next up, thanks. We wanted to know overall what proportion of the courses submitted for review had met standards. And of those 2,091 reviews, a total of 96.2% had met standards. More than half, so the 54.8% that you see here, met standards on the first review, and then 41.4% met standards after an amendment. The remaining reviews that we had data for had not yet met standards, though some of those may have been in the amendment process at the time that data were pulled. We won't go into all of the other descriptive statistics that were run here, but I can tell you that we also looked at scores after the first review and amended reviews, and there were also some inferential statistics that I ran to compare different types of courses, for example, by disciplines or different course management systems. I looked at the proportion of courses meeting each of the specific standards. This can provide some insight into which aspects of the course design the reviewed online courses are most often missing. What I thought was very interesting, though, was the relationship between the values that you see on this table, so the proportion of courses that met or did not meet each standard, and the inter-rater agreement values, which we'll show you on the next slide. So most of the courses had 3 reviewers. So what we have here are just the course reviews that had 3 reviewers. On the left are the proportion of reviews in which all 3 reviewers agreed on whether the specific standard was met or not. Most of these values were very high. The median was almost 86%. This could be all 3 reviewers saying, yes, this standard is met, or all three saying, no, this standard is not met. On the right, I plotted this with the percent of courses meeting that standard, and you can see there's a relatively strong relationship here. The three specific standards that had the lowest inter-rater agreement rates were also those that were least likely to be met. This suggests that the course designers and reviewers may need more training related to these specific standards, because not only are they not meeting these standards in their courses, but when they're looking at other courses and reviewing other courses, they're often disagreeing on whether or not this standard is met there. So it makes me question whether or not they're really clear on what these standards really mean. And in the report that I provided to Quality Matters, in the summary at the end, I pointed out these three specific standards as being those that I would probably target first in terms of professional development training or rubric revisions. And then just a few other last points to highlight from the analyses. I was asked to compare courses based on whether or not they were designed to meet the Quality Matters standards. Courses designed to meet the standards were 70% more likely to meet standards in the first review compared to those that were not designed to meet QM standards. They also tended to have higher scores if they're in their first review. I compared courses on the basis of whether or not they had been internally pre-reviewed with the Quality Matters standards. Those that were pre-reviewed were 42% times more likely to meet standards in the first review. And again, they also had higher scores on their first review. And my last point here, I made a comparison on the basis of how many of the courses developers had Quality Matters professional development. And I did find a positive relationship when I looked at scores on the first review and any amended reviews. The more course developers with Quality Matters training, the higher their scores are. So while the analyses on this slide didn't necessarily inform any updates of the rubric, it does provide evidence that training and using the rubric leads to more positive results. I'll turn it over to Barbara now.
Okay, thanks so much, Whitney. I do see a question in the chat about the standards that were most often missed, and it looks like folks are answering that. So thank you so much. I want to let you know that in addition to the literature review, which you've seen and hopefully heard about, and the inter-rater agreement analyses that Whitney Zimmerman did, we do take a look at data from the QM community. In spring of 2017, the 46,902 members of the QM community who were in the QM database at that time were sent a survey asking for their feedback on the 5th edition of the QM Higher Education Rubric. And a total of 755 people responded to the survey for a low response rate of 1.6%, but while this is a low response rate, the main goals of the survey are to give the QM community the opportunity to have input into the rubric revision process and to identify issues that the rubric committee might take into consideration as they work on their recommendations for improving the rubric. With that said, 80% or more of the respondents said that the rubric works well. And by that, what we mean is that the rubric is clear, the concept of alignment is clear, the rubric is usable for course reviews, no specific review standards should be deleted, the course worksheet captures all the relevant information, and the point values of the specific review standards reflect their relative importance in the rubric. One thing that did come through pretty strongly is in the written feedback is that the most important standard to work on and strengthen is General Standard 8 on accessibility and usability, and that is in fact what happened. Next slide, please. Okay, so once the wording for the specific review standards had been determined, it was time to attach point values to each of the standards. And for this, we used a Delphi survey method, and I'll put a link in the chat about that in just a moment. But basically, that used an anonymous surveying technique in several different rounds. So we had 3 rounds of that. The first was for everybody, all the respondents on the rubric committee and the legacy committee, to assign initial point values, what they thought each of the specific review standards should have as a point value. The second round asked for people to assign point values and give rationales, and the same thing with the third round. So I'll show you a little bit how that works on the next slide. Okay, so what happened was in the first round, every single specific review standard was included in the survey, and everybody assigned the initial point value that they thought it should have. After that first round, we took a look at the standards for which there was 85% or higher agreement, and we removed those from what was sent out in the second round. In the second round, so it was relatively few number of specific review standards for the rubric committee and legacy committee to look at, and what they had to do in addition to providing the point values, they had to give their rationales along with that. Again, at the end of the second round, we removed those that had 85% or higher agreement, and then for the third round, sent out the relatively few standards that did not have that agreement. But we gave everyone the rationales of whether the point value should be 3 for essential, 2 for very important, or 1 for important, so that in making their decisions in the third round, people had those rationales as part of helping them make their decision. And then for the results of the third round, we finalized with majority rule of agreement on the point values and a leadership review. And with that, I am going to hand things off for the next slide to Bethany Simonich.
Thanks, Barbara. So just to bring this conversation about research around kind of full circle, remember that the QM rubric itself is research. It's theory-driven, and it includes empirical, design-based research, as well as evidence-based data from its use and application. The rubric also seeks additional evidence through several types of validation, such as construct and content validity, face validity, and also criterion and predictive validity. The QM rubric, as well as the QM review processes, are focused on assuring quality in online and hybrid course design, and they really can form the bedrock for an institution's overall quality assurance plan. And next slide. So recall that in 2003, Maryland Online was awarded a FIPSI grant, and their goal there was to really outline the scalable rubric and process to certify the quality of online and blended courses across institutions. So the first rubric reflected the then current research in online course design and online learning, and it was that strong research foundation that still continues today with each update of the rubric. Today, Quality Matters continues to help institutions deliver on their promise of online quality by providing new ways to adopt and adapt the QM rubric to meet unique institutional needs, such as developing a custom internal review that includes meeting the QM essential standards. So the link there that's included on the slide will take you to the page on the QM website that will give you more information about the internal review for QM essential standards. And next slide. So Quality Matters continuously collects and analyzes data on the rubric and course reviews by looking at course review applications, standards met or not met during reviews, and also post-review feedback from reviewers, the course representative, and the Quality Matters coordinator. It's data such as this that helps to inform QM about the application of the rubric during reviews and also helps to inform the revision of the rubric. And I'm going to turn it over now to Kay.
Thank you, Bethany. So recapping, so the big takeaway here is that the QM rubric is a result of regular and rigorous review procedures influenced by practitioner use and feedback. The latest research, educational research literature, and fit-for-purpose feedback from the community via the survey that Barbara talked about, as well as data that QM regularly collects and analyzes from the professional development, facilitators, and staff interactions with the community. These data are presented to the expert members of the rubric committee, who then, during months of hard work and meetings, integrate these diverse data when evaluating each standard and annotation that was in the 5th edition, reorganizing and, when necessary, reworking new standards and annotations into the 6th edition. Next slide, please. Okay. So the rubric, standards, and annotation is the outcome of research, and the rubric, the QM rubric, is then a validated research tool to assure quality course design of an online or blended course. Thank you for your attention up until now. We will turn this over back to Barbara, who can guide us through your questions.
Okay, so at this point in time, there are no questions in the Q&A. It looks like maybe some are putting them in the chat. So let me just see if I can see what's in the chat. Okay, someone asked, is there a comparison document which highlights the changes and additions to the rubric? Okay, I know that there is a rubric update, and that is something that members of Quality Matters can take, and that highlights the changes and additions to the rubric. All right, next question. What is the relationship between QM standards and LMS providers? Has QM influenced LMS design and upgrades? Is there any relationship between course effectiveness as scored using QM and the LMS satisfaction? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, just briefly, Brenda might want to jump in and talk about the LMS. The standards are agnostic to any particular LMS. To the second part of the question, or the second question, has there been any study on the effectiveness of using the rubric, QM rubric, by LMS system? That would have to be something that an institution would have to have collect data on, because Quality Matters doesn't have any access to that information. We can reach out and see if anybody in the community has done that level of analysis, but offhand, I'm not familiar with that kind of analysis that's been done.
Okay, if I could just jump in and kind of add to that a little bit. So I'm only speaking for, my knowledge on behalf of educational institutions, not QM. But for the most part, the LMS impact would come into play for standards like 8.1 when we're talking about navigation and does it facilitate ease of use. I know that for, when we're talking about different learning management systems, there are some things that are in that LMS or organized in the LMS in such a way that it's by default, but there's also things that your institution whether there's been a discussion about this or not, may have added to the LMS or may require, or they may have, for example, a very static left-hand navigation bar that could be a factor of the LMS. It could be by choice of your institution. So sometimes it's really hard to separate out the impact of navigation just specifically on whether that's the LMS or whether it's your institutional use of the LMS. So just something to keep in mind there.
Okay, the next question. How was the decision to renumber or blend from Rubric 5 to Rubric 6 made?
I think that question is asking about the number of the specific review standards. Those are organized by point value, which is a result of the Delphi study that Barbara described. So once the point values are added, the standards are then organized according to point value and relationship. So there may be some standards that quote unquote go together better than other standards. So, so that's how we make a determination about how to apply that number. If you mean the scoring is it is related to what Barbara explained earlier, which is how the point values are assigned by Delphi study.
Okay, the next person is asking, what are some of the most impactful changes that have been made in the 6th edition? And maybe Brenda wants to address that.
So that's a great question. One of the biggest changes, I think, was the adjustments to Standard 8.3. So Standard 8.3 used to be one standard that was all about all of accessibility in a course, that there were materials were provided that would meet the needs of diverse learners. So in the 6th edition, that standard was decoupled, so to speak. So the Standard 8.3 now addresses the accessibility of text and images in courses that include learning management system pages, HTML pages, any documents in the course. And so that is also to meet the needs of diverse learners, and that is an essential standard now. And this is the first time that we've had an essential standard about the content being accessible. There is still a standard that is about the course providing alternative means of access to multimedia content and formats that meet the needs of diverse learners, but that standard is a 2-point or very important standard. So that is probably one of the largest changes in the rubric. Standard 8, General Standard 8 was really reworked, and kudos to the rubric committee. They did a fantastic job of looking at what would make the most sense for our members, and and what would make the most sense, what is really quality, what is really important. And then we also have in the standards, in the rubric, there are some other changes, including in Standard 4.3. That one, as you might recall from Dr. Zimmerman's research, that it was not necessarily, it was one where folks had trouble making a decision. So the course models academic integrity expected of learners by providing both source references and permission for use of instructional materials. So if you have materials in your course, that there is permission that's been granted to use those. So those are a couple of big changes. The alignment is still alignment. We've clarified and updated the annotations across the board. There are more instructions to reviewers so that they understand when a standard is met. Some standards were rolled into other standards, and that is all explained in the rubric update that is available free to QM members through the end of this year. And to register for it, you can go to your My QM account and find it under Workshop Register menu. You can register for the rubric update through that link. I think that was another question that folks had. So Barbara?
Thanks. Okay, somebody asked, should a course that has been certified under the 5th QM rubric be recertified under the 6th QM rubric?
If it's been 5 years, yes. So the standard, the seal that is given to a course is good for 5 years. So if the course was reviewed in 2013 or prior, and then it should be reviewed with the 6th edition. If your course was reviewed last year or at the beginning of this year, it doesn't have to be re-reviewed. You can do you know, a recertification if you want to, but looking at this, there is a date and there is metadata behind the QM seal that's used with courses. So it explains how that course, you know, when that course met standards, and that seal is good for 5 years. There, I see a question, can you only access the new annotations by purchasing the latest workbook? Okay, so the QM Rubric Workbook is the publication of the Quality Matters rubric. You can, as a QM member, access the rubric through the self-review tool in the CRMS or Course Review Management System that you can link to from MyQM.
Okay, thanks, Brenda. There are a couple of questions that center on this. Do you think the fact that the rubric score is now 100 points, is that going to influence the perception that a perfect score implies a perfect course?
It could, but that is how the numbers came out. It was not intentional for the rubric to be 100 points. 100 points does not, even if a course meets all standards, there could still be room for improvement because our standard of quality is at an 85% level. So we know nothing is perfect, no one is perfect, nothing, perfection just isn't really realistic, and so there's always room for improvement. So I don't know that there is any such thing as a perfect course. We change things and update them according to what's working and what's not working. So I think that that is really a lot of what, you know, people may have that perception that if they attain 100 points, people still said that they had a perfect score when we had 95 points, when we had 99 points. They said that they received a perfect score on their review. But that doesn't mean that the course is, just because a course earned all of the points, yes, it's a quality course, but there's always room for improvement. In fact, we regularly remind our review teams that even if a standard is met, you can still write a recommendation for improvement.
Okay, thanks, Brenda. Yes, I was just going to follow up to say that most course reviews, definitely even for standards that are met, have some types of recommendations for improvement. And so just from seeing that, even with a score of 100, if that were to happen, you would be able to see that there's room for improvement. Okay, somebody asked a question about when we refer to diverse learners, what is our understanding of this?
So General Standard 8 is about accessibility and usability. So when you caption your videos, you're not only helping people who cannot hear. You are also helping people who have English as a second language, people with dyslexia, people who are trying to study when their spouse is sitting next to them and watching television. You're helping people who need additional help with reinforcement of the content. So diverse learners, it means all different kinds of learners who are in all different kinds of situations. It's not just about people who have disabilities. It's about making course content accessible, because not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also helpful for everyone who is a student. I often turn on the captioning when I'm watching a video at home, even on YouTube. So it can really be helpful for learners of all different backgrounds.
Okay, next question. What prompted the rubric redesign? Was it more about keeping current with the research or addressing a possible blind spot in the rubric?
Well, we have always said that the Quality Matters rubric is a living document, that it is that we want it to keep it current. So the answer to your question, Joe, is yes, both things. We knew that folks were having trouble with applying 6.5 and 4.6 in particular, and we also knew that we were learning more and more about what was going on in the in online learning. So it felt like it was the right time to update the rubric. And because we're on editions, there's not any kind of an expiration date to the rubric. So we expect this rubric to be around for the next few years for sure. I noted that someone had mentioned about the course review management system having now has a box for evidence and a box for suggestions for improvement, and that's there because we wanted to help reviewers have a place to put down what they found in a course. Reviewers were often putting that in the recommendations box, so we wanted to give them a space to put that, and to also remind them when they were writing their suggestion for improvement that this is the evidence to back up their suggestion. So it definitely helps them with that.
Okay, we have a question. When you refer to permission, what is your understanding of what counts as permission? I'm not sure what that's referring to actually.
Well, it refers to, I think, if you're using copyrighted works in your course, then you have to attain permission for usage. Their institutions often purchase permission from journals via a subscription to use their journal articles. So when you go into your library's e-reserve, there's usually a message there that says you can download one copy of this article and print one copy of this article to use for your own course, but you can't distribute it to all of your friends, for example. So having that disclaimer there is a way to show that you have permission to use this, and these are the parameters for your permission for usage. And in the standard for 4.3, it does have a number of different examples about how permissions might appear in the course, and as well as a list of examples of materials that require permission for usage. When you see the Creative Commons license, that doesn't mean that you can just use that material freely. There are ramifications behind that. That is a way to control your copyright so that you can say it's okay to use this as long as you cite me. And so I'd encourage you to check out the Creative Commons website that explains all of their different usages that can be put out there.
Okay, it looks like maybe just one more. No more no more questions at this point in time. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll cover a little bit more information. All righty. So I wanted just to shoot up there the email addresses of today's presenters if you wanted to reach out to them individually with any kind of questions that you have. And of course, you'll be seeing these again in the recording, but I'll leave that there for just a moment if you want to take note. Okay, next slide, please. And then I also wanted to mention that we do have some upcoming QM research events. We will be at the research table at QM Connect in St. Louis, October 31st through November 2nd. So come visit us there if you have research questions or things you'd like to discuss. I will be there. The research colleagues will be there, and we'll be glad to help with any questions that we can at that time. Also, the week of November 26th, we'll be having our next research webinar in the series this year. It will cover the third Quality Matters, EduVentures, Changing Landscape of Online Education survey results, and we'll be going over highlights at that time. So information will be coming out to you about that. In addition, we also have the ABCs of QM Focused Research Workshop, which starts on November 14th, and information will be coming out about how to register for that. But also there's the link that is going to be in the recording that you get from the webinar. So anybody who's interested in doing their own research, it's an intensive workshop that will help you get your research question and everything narrowed down. So with that, I would like to thank all of the attendees today and the presenters in particular. And we really appreciate your attendance. We will get the recording and all the relevant links out to you, along with the screencast from Wade Lee that will go through the literature review. Thank you very much.